Well, people loved by God, once again, good morning. Great to be with you in the Lord's house today. And those of you worshiping with us online, blessed and happy Sunday to you as well. As I mentioned in our outset, we're in the midst of a message series called Help for the Hurried. The reality is, for a lot of us, life probably feels like we're pulled in a lot of directions. Got a calendar with 1,000 things we got to do, a to-do list that's long, and we can feel the pressure. Because I think a lot of us feel that, we wanted to say, hey, Lent is the time for each of us in our own way to slow down, kind of take a spiritual pulse and inventory, and to reconnect, or maybe connect for the very first time with the God who created us and is for us and with us. Off the bat, we said, hey, we're not going to scold you for being busy, because that's the reality of our lives. But more than that, we're going to point you, and I'm going to point me to Jesus, who in the midst of a hurried and busy life is there for me. And so that's why we have this kind of Lenten prayer station. I encourage you to make your way over there, maybe after receiving the Lord's Supper or during the last song or after this message, and just kind of have a moment to reconnect with God. But this series is a lot more than just one moment here in church. Our hope is that what we talk about here impacts your Monday through Saturday, that you can feel in the midst of being hurried and pulled in a lot of directions that Jesus is truly in your corner and by your side. Last week, Pastor Chris Singer was here as my substitute. Thank you, Pastor Chris. I was with my daughter Megan in St. Louis, Missouri for a volleyball tournament. We had a great time together. Sunday, we were on our way back north on I-55, and she asked me who took my place here at church on Sunday. And I told her, hey, Chris Singer from the organization that does all the comfort dogs. And her ever supportive reply was, what if they like him more than they like you? So thank you, Megan. I appreciate all the support. So the text that I want to focus on with you today comes from the first and really ends up being the longest extended teaching of Jesus with his disciples in his entire earthly ministry. It's called the Sermon on the Mount. We're actually going to spend time on this in the month of May, but today we're going to focus just on part of it. And let me warn you, having been off for 2 weeks, I'm a little bit like an uncaged lion today. So I'm looking at what I prepared, and I'm like, man, this is like 2 weeks worth. And all of you are like, yay, great. I'll rein it in, I promise. Matthew chapter 6, starting at verse 5. Here's what Jesus says. And when you pray, do not be like the hypocrites, for they love to pray standing in the synagogues and on the street corners to be seen by men. I tell you the truth, they have received their reward in full. But when you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. Then your Father who sees what is done in secret will reward you. And when you pray, do not keep on babbling like pagans, for they think they will be heard because of their many words. Do not be like them. For your Father knows you need them. The Father knows what you need before you ask him. This then is how you should pray. Our Father in heaven, hallowed be your name. Your kingdom come, your will be done on earth as it is in heaven. Give us today our daily bread. Forgive us our debts as we also have forgiven our debtors. And lead us not into temptation, but deliver us from the evil one. This is a pretty clear and direct teaching of Jesus on prayer, which I think is something that we could all use a little help and support from Jesus. It's a struggle for many of us, and it's a struggle for many of us really for different reasons. Some of us are really not sure what to say, and it becomes intimidating to talk to God. The last thing you want to do is feel like you said the wrong thing to God. So you end up maybe not saying much at all. For others, we kind of know we're supposed to do it, but sometimes you wonder, is God really even listening? Does it really even make a difference? So is it really worth investing a lot of my own personal valuable time to pray? So what here does Jesus teach? Here Jesus holds up a don't do this example and a do this example. It reminds me of, do you remember growing up they had a magazine called Highlights? And remember Highlights magazine? Highlights magazine, do they still make Highlights magazine? Oh, that's so good to know. But they had a category called Goofus and Gallant. And you remember that category? It was like they had a motto, and they're like, here's what Goofus does, don't do that. But here's what Gallant does, and do that. So Jesus, knowing that the human mind likes examples, gives us almost a Goofus and Gallant example when it comes to prayer. And the Goofus example he comes up with is, don't be like the hypocrites. And you should probably know, this is pretty interesting, that word hypocrites, Greek word there, hypokrites, meaning that they liked that word so much they didn't want to change it very much, because it was a technical, theatrical term for the use of a mask in theater. So I reached out to one of our church's theatrical families, the Coulterman family, and I said, do you guys have a theater mask on hand? They're like, yeah, we have about 49 of them. Which would you like? So this is one that Nathan recently used in a performance at Libertyville High School and theater. And so really what Jesus is saying here is, don't be like a hypocrite who puts on a mask and in essence plays a different character than they actually are. That's really what a hypocrite is. It's somebody who puts on a mask and says, I want you all to think that I am somebody that I am really not. Jesus says those folks love to be in the synagogues and on the street corners solely to be seen by men. They were praying then, think about it, not for the conversation with God, but merely for the value of what other people thought about them while they were praying. Praying merely for the show of it, to be seen as holy. And Jesus wants no part of this. In fact, Jesus despises this. In the New Testament, in his earthly ministry, Jesus is generally incredibly compassionate and gracious with so many people, with the exception of one group, and that's the religious elite who did everything merely as a show to others. Here's how Jesus describes them in Matthew chapter 23. It's a little bit of an extended teaching, so follow it with me. Then Jesus said to the crowds and his disciples, the teachers of the law and the Pharisees sit in Moses' seat. So you must obey them and do everything they tell you. Here's what Jesus says, but do not do what they do, for they do not practice what they preach. They tie up heavy loads and put them on men's shoulders, but they themselves are not willing to lift a finger to move them. So they love to tell everybody else what to do. Everything they do is done for men to see. They make their phylacteries wide and the tassels on their garments long. They like to dress so important. They love the place of honor at the banquets and the most important seats in the synagogues. They love to be greeted in marketplaces and to have men call them rabbi. They like the social part of it. Here Jesus then says this, woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites, you mask wearers. You shut the kingdom of heaven in men's faces. You yourselves do not enter, nor will you let those who are trying to enter. Woe to you, teachers of the law and Pharisees, you hypocrites. You are like whitewashed tombs, which look beautiful on the outside, but on the inside are full of dead man's bones and everything unclean. Two responses to this. First, a very theological term, wow. All right, Jesus really comes after that group. And second, if Jesus spoke that to them with them in the audience, no wonder he got crucified. because boy, did he take them to task. And so why does Jesus have such a problem with this, of doing everything for show? What's the problem with the mask wearing when it comes to life and spiritual leadership, and especially for our purposes, prayer? Here's the answer. They were taking something that was meant to be personal and beautiful and authentic with God, and just making it all a show for others. So Jesus says, in essence, in doing that and making prayer a show, you've missed the whole point of it all. In fact, Jesus says, if you do that, you've received your reward in full, meaning you did this solely to be seen by others. Well, guess what? What did you get? You were seen by others. That's great. But it has nothing to do, Jesus says, with your life with me. So if that's not what prayer is, if Jesus says, hey, really you got to look out for that, what is it then? Are you ready? Matthew chapter 6, verse 6, just the first half. When you pray, go into your room, close the door, and pray to your Father who is unseen. So what is prayer? Prayer is a beautiful, personal, and authentic conversation with God. And because that's what it is, and really what God so desperately wants you to have and wants you to have who are watching online with us today, think of it then like this. Think less, oh boy, what am I supposed to say? And more, what do I feel like saying? So when you sit down and you're going to have an authentic prayer moment with God, you may be trained to think, and maybe religious leaders kind of did this to you. If I ever made you feel this way, I'm really sorry. But don't worry about what you're supposed to say or think about, okay, what am I supposed to say here? Just merely say, what do I feel like saying in this beautiful, personal, authentic moment with God? And because it's intended to be personal and authentic, it's going to sound a lot less formal and a lot less, theologically nuanced, and a lot more like these examples. It might be as simple as this: Lord, I'm worn out and I could use your help. Is that a prayer that the Lord hears? Does he like that one? Yeah. Or how about this? Father, I want to believe in you, but I'm not seeing you or feeling you at work these days. Some of you have communicated to me that you've kind of felt like that in prayer. My response as your pastor, I affirm that. And I think that's a really important thing to say to God sometimes. Because sometimes it's going to feel like God isn't responding to our prayers or isn't moving earth like we want him to. So bring that to him, because that's your authentic feeling with God. Or how about this? God, I'm not really sure what to say, but I need you. It's personal. It's authentic. And what's then the result of those prayers? Matthew 6, the second part. Then your Father, who sees what is done in secret, will reward you. So friends, can I invite you to just think about it this way? If Jesus would endure the brutality of the cross and endure an execution by crucifixion out of love for you, do you think he'll love you enough to just hear your prayers? Answer, absolutely. Like if he'll go to those great lengths, that great length to show you how much he loves you, won't he hear us when we authentically and personally talk to him? In fact, that's how the Apostle Paul talks about it. Romans chapter 8, verse 32, he says this: but he who did not spare his own son, Jesus, but gave him up for us all, how will he not also, along with him, graciously give us all things? Like, if he's going to do that, absolutely he's going to be in our corner as we pray. I had a chance this week to visit with one of our 8 o'clock worshipers who hasn't been here in probably like 2 months because she's been on a long journey of a lot of surgeries and highs and lows. Her name is Joanne Engelking. Maybe a lot of you know and love Joanne. I'll tell you, I miss seeing her in church. When I spend 16 years, whatever I've been doing this for here, 15 years, seeing Joanne every Sunday, and then I don't see her for 2 weeks, I'm like, I really miss you. So I went to go visit her this week, and she's home. And unprompted, we were just kind of talking about the journey she's been on, and she reported this to me. She said, Pastor, I have felt him, as in Jesus, by my side every step of the way. And she can report that because she lives a Matthew chapter 6, verse 6 prayer life. That is just her and Jesus talking to Jesus honestly and authentically, and she's felt Jesus by her side. So let me send you with a quote. It's not exactly about prayer, but I heard it and I thought of it as like a support for prayer. This is from a prolific author, Christian author by the name of C.S. Lewis. Here's what he says: good and evil both increase at compound interest. That is why little decisions you and I make every day, like the decision to close the door and talk to God honestly in prayer, that's why little decisions you and I make every day are of such infinite importance. The smallest good act today, you talking to Jesus in prayer, is the capture of a strategic point from which a few months later, you may be able to go on to victories you have never dreamed of. That's what prayer is. And that's what prayer can do. Amen?